All right, so our final pillar is obviously medication, which is something that obviously Dr. Rob is going to speak about in much more detail than I. When I went through mine, just to preface this, I found a lack of information, a lack of understanding, and eventually I rang a hotline because things for me seemed like they were well out of my control and I was starting to have really bad thoughts. And so I rang a hotline, I won't say which one, and there was no information passed to me, there was no real help. It was just go and see your GP. I went to my GP, who said, "Yes, Adam, that sounds like depression," which is exactly what the hotline said. "That sounds like depression, go see your GP." Then the GP went, "That sounds like depression." I went, "Thanks, that's the second time." I kind of felt like it was depression. And then there wasn't actually any information or any guidance on what I should do, which is what Rob does, which is amazing, which is why we're all here. But it was basically, okay, I hear it's depression, prescribe? Prescribe, it's been a long day. Prescribe antidepressants. And so I went home with these little white tablets, and I took my first one. For me, personally, my thought process was, my brain got me into this, it's gonna get me out. But that's not for everyone, and I was just lucky that, and very lucky in some respects, that I found freediving at that time, because it just happened to tweak something in me, and I searched and I found some answers. But as I said previously, I had been a little bit too high and mighty on my high horse, and I'd actually affected some friends of mine because I said, medication, antidepressants aren't the way, and then they've gone and gone off at cold turkey, and it had a really serious and detrimental effect. So it's really great that you're going to get the perspective from someone who's actually a GP. So
yeah, and it's unfortunately a bit of a common story. I do hear that it's a knee-jerk reaction very early on. No other advice. Here's a medicine, and as you said, it doesn't mean that medication's not useful. It doesn't mean that it doesn't work. What I say is that on its own it doesn't work. I had a similar experience personally where I was very depressed and went to a doctor and got a medicine, started the medicine and went, but I still feel shitty. It's not working. Because of that experience and many other patients' experiences, I talk about that medication is one of the 5 pillars, so it's 1/5 of the treatment. And in and of itself, it won't do all the work. It can't. But it can be a really, really important, a really safe and effective part of the treatment. I think most of my patients, we work through diet, exercise, tribe, the psychological stuff. And as we slowly work through that cycle, if we're still not working, if we're nailing all of those pillars and things aren't working, then we step on to an antidepressant or a medicine. Because it can be a really painful condition, it can be a really detrimental and a devastating condition. It can ruin relationships and take away your job, and so it's a serious thing that we know that medicine will help some people. We obviously try not to use it unless we have to, or at least lots of us do.
Yeah.
And we try and be really mindful of the possible side effects, which we'll go into in a sec. But it's a really important point that if your doctor has put you on a medicine, talk to them. If you want to come off it, talk to them about it first, or talk to me about it first. There are ways to come off them, but you shouldn't stop them very quickly, most of them. You should work with your doctor to come off it. You do need a team around you, your psychologist, your friends, your GP, and yourself is a crucial part of the team. But there are safe ways to come off it. It doesn't work for everyone, and they're not for everyone. But if you're on it, don't stop quickly, and do not beat yourself up about using a medicine to feel better or to treat this condition. the analogy that I use is to say people, the bloke with epilepsy doesn't feel stupid about using a medicine to control his seizures because they're dangerous and painful. There's other things in your lifestyle that you can do to control it, but it's part of the picture. The medicine's an important part. Or diabetes, people inject insulin and go, wow, that's foreign. But some people need to, and so we don't beat ourselves up. But mental health has this stigma around it, and it's the stigma itself can be detrimental and impede good treatment. Either from yourself, we put a stigma on ourselves about needing a medicine to be normal, or other people do. And so we've got to be really careful about, use the medicine, use it the right way, and think about the medicine as part of a system. It's part of a whole treatment.
So I suppose, the reason for doing anything, generally people need to know the what and the why. The why is pretty self-explanatory. We've just spent quite a bit of time with the pillars talking about the whys behind this, and the why is very simple. We want to feel good. I mean, humans, full stop. We're chasing happiness. That's what we're basically doing. Happiness and security and love and all those things. So we know what the why is, but I suppose in this case it's the what. Like what is it that we're actually taking, and what does it do at that simplest form?
So the most common antidepressant medicines are called SSRIs, and that stands for selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what the hell does that mean? Serotonin is a neurotransmitter in our brains that we know when we use these medicines and the serotonin goes up, people have less depressive symptoms. We know that serotonin can be thought of as sort of a happy neurotransmitter. It infers, our brains are incredibly complex. There's networks of neurons, and our behavior and our thoughts are incredibly complex. And so this is a simplistic view. And in reality, we have theories about how antidepressants and why they work and how depression develops, but we don't have any real, concrete proof that this is how. And because it's a really complicated disease. It's genetics, the environment, our own thoughts, obviously all the pillars, our diet, our behaviour, everything sort of feeds into it. But we know that these medicines block the reuptake of serotonin, and that subsequently leaves more serotonin in the brain that leads downstream to less depressive symptoms and less anxious symptoms.
So what you're saying is that the brain, in a way, like when you're in depression, when you get any bit of like serotonin, because you're feeling so bad, it's just going like, whack, I want it all, and so it just depletes it all.
Yep.
And then you're left with nothing, and that's when you get that feeling of like, oh man, I'm just down. Yeah. So what they're doing is just stopping the absolute wiping of it and just slower release. Is it?
Yeah, blocks the reuptake. So when the nerve signal comes along in the neuron, this end of the neuron releases serotonin into the space between the neurons, called the synapse, and then that serotonin goes across the space or the synapse to be received by the adjacent neuron, and that serotonin binds to the adjacent neuron and perpetuates that signal.
Okay.
So that's how neurotransmitters work. They're chemicals that transmit an electrical signal in one neuron into a chemical signal across the gap and then back into an electrical signal.
Okay.
That's one neuron and one gap.
Yeah.
We have billions of neurons and networks of activity. So obviously we're going from a very, very simplistic idea and transferring it into a complicated outcome. But we know that by blocking that reuptake in the adjacent neuron leaves more serotonin in that gap in the synapse, and that upregulates downstream somehow into mood changes.
Yep.
There's a few different ones. There's other neurotransmitters that are affected by some of these antidepressants. The noradrenaline is one, so there's selective serotonin and noradrenaline reuptake inhibitors. And there's a newer class of medicines that work on melatonin. We know that the sleep and sleep disruption is important in depression, and these medicines, which are fairly new onto the scene, augment physiological sleep rather rather than being a sedative, they help to augment natural sleep through the melatonin receptors. And that seems to have a good downstream effect in depression as well. So the next thing that all patients ask me is, okay, so what are these things going to do to me? What are the side effects? And everyone experiences a fairly different array of side effects. Commonest ones depend on the type of antidepressant, and it's really important to talk to your GP about what are the possible side effects. Some have very little, but it's an important question. I think it's probably best to go through them in detail for your specific medication with your doctor. But there's an array of different possible side effects. We know some of them can cause a bit of weight gain. We know some of them can cause apathy, so meaning that you're feeling not too happy, not too sad. You're sort of in this middle range. So none of these side effects are desirable. They're accidental effects that these medicines have, and that's why we judiciously choose when to use medicines. We try not to use them at the drop of a hat. We try and nail everything else and then get there. But people who are really, really suffering and are in exquisite pain from depression are sometimes will accept some array of side effects in exchange for that pain going away. It's not always a long-term prospect. Sometimes we use medications for a short period of time, months or a few years, but some people are on medicines for life. And like epilepsy, these are conditions that we manage. They don't always cure, they don't always go away, and some people need that medication for life. I think we've got to be careful not to be too concerned about that. We want to make sure that people have their condition managed. I like to try and emphasise that if we're on a medicine, we've got to be nailing those other pillars. Otherwise, you can't expect this medicine to work for you, and you'll just be having these side effects for no or limited benefit. So it's like a chainsaw. It can be a dangerous tool, but if used correctly, it can be really effective and safe. So we've just got to be judicious.
And I suppose even at a not at a mental illness level, we're never the finished product on anything. Like people sometimes have this idea like I'm always kind of cruisy and not stressed and don't suffer from things because I do meditation. It's not the case. You're just never the finished product. You're just constantly working on things and managing things. And I suppose the overriding message with this is that especially in those early stages when you don't know what's going on, medication is a way to kind of help you up front. And then I think those other pillars fall into that. And then it could be something where that's when you would then talk to someone like Rob and go like, hey mate, I feel like I might have this under control without the medication now. Why don't I try the 4 pillars, slowly wean me off the 5th, which is probably no surprise we've tackled this last. And then the 4 pillars, so the 5 pillars become the 4 pillars. And then if for some reason in the future you go, well, I'm doing all the 4 pillars, it's not actually cutting the mustard, well then okay, why don't we try on a smaller dose again? I mean, I'm not a GP, but I'm just talking out loud in terms of
that's exactly what we do. And sometimes, as I said, when people are in those pits of despair, you've got foggy brain, you've got no motivation, you're not looking after yourself, you do need sometimes that medication to get you out of that, get you moving, get you a bit more motivated, and then start attacking those other pillars. That's exactly what we do. You should be a GP.
Yeah, should be. I'll start my study. See you in 6 years.
Get into it.
I think there's some really good messages and some takeaways from that. Is like you shouldn't feel bad about doing it. Everyone will have their own opinions. Everyone will give you their peace of mind. You just got to kind of do what works for you. I think it is just like we said, one of those pillars. I don't think you would just take any of these pillars in isolation and go, oh well, sweet, if I eat lots of kale tomorrow I'll be sweet. Or hey, if I do 100 burpees a day, all of a sudden won't have depression. I think the overwhelming message so far, and it's been a good one, is this is just another one of the pillars. that you can use. Obviously, this is in conjunction with your GP and having a specific plan. So,
I love the unfinished product as well. I'm constantly revisiting the 5 pillars myself and going, oh, that's why I'm not feeling great. I've let this one go. I'm constantly revisiting it and going back over it. And the 5 pillars is supposed to be a plan.
Yeah.
You know, it gives you something to grab onto and go, no, I'm nailing my diet. I'm exercising a lot. Oh, I'm not going cycling with my mates anymore.
Yeah.
It's tribe. That's what's lacking. You put that back in, everything lifts, and you start to feel good again. So
I think sport is a good little microcosm as well of this as well. Like, it's very similar. I mean, you if you want to be the best at the particular sport you're doing, for example, you don't just go like, all right, I'm just going to have the best diet. I'm going to have a better diet than my competitor Rob, and I'm just going to smash him. You don't do that. Like, if you sit down to plan an event, or if you've got a coach, they're going to go, all right, Rob, your diet needs to be spot on. You need to do this, this, and this. Exercise, we need to boom, 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 and you need to be at this point by that date, and then we'll taper off before the event. Psychologically, you need to be strong. You need to be stronger than your competitors, because when it gets to that point and it's you and them and there's only 10 meters to go and you got to get to that finishing line before them, well, it's kind of going to be who's mentally the toughest. So sleep, all of these things that we spoke about. Make sure you're getting good sleep. Make sure you're not drinking too much alcohol. Like, all of this sort of stuff is a plan to make sure that your performance is the best. And that's, really, if you look at life as a performance, if you want to achieve good things in your business, if you want to be the best dad, or mum or wife or husband or whatever, it means you mentally and physically need to be in the best shape possible. Because if you don't have your health, be it mentally or physically, you won't operate well in anything. No. Everything will suffer eventually. You might work really well at a high level at work, but then eventually you'll get chronic fatigue because your body will push back on you. So, I think some really good messages in that.
I think we're talking about balance, aren't we?
And,
it's not working too much, but working enough that you're feeling productive and happy and exercising a lot, but not too much so that your immune system's still functioning. And sleep is an interesting one. I think it's like air and water. This is essential to life. And so sleep isn't in and of itself a pillar, but it's part of the whole picture of balance. You need a great quality of sleep, and we're learning more and more about how depression and anxiety are affected by poor sleep, and how poor sleep can lead to depression, anxiety, and other mental health problems.
I think it's depression and anxiety are like bedfellows. I think they work together in some ways. Like, too much anxiety, I feel like, from my experience, kind of can put you into that depressive state, because you have those big lows, I think, afterwards. And sleep, anxiety is, I quite often talk to people about, if you are so anxious through the day and you're so future focused, you're so worried about what's coming. Like, for me, anxiety should just be rebranded as fear of something that's coming. And so, like, being anxious about, is the boss going to lay me off? Am I going to lose my girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever? Can I afford the mortgage? All these things are like, our brains can't separate the difference between real and perceived threat to our life. So it just marks everything as a threat. And so if you're in that state all day, 7 days a week, like, I think we spoke about it earlier, you go to sleep and your brain just still says, we still think there's threats, so we're not going to go to sleep. We're going to keep looking for these threats. And sleep, as we know, sleep is super important. So, I think this pillow, it was obviously definitely one that just had to be in there. And that's basically the end of the 5 pillars.